facing the police every single day.
Article on what Florida's out-of-control police state did to young black boys in a youth camp. It killed them. Just like in Nazi Germany when you are considered inferior like the Jews were. Nickel boys, reminder of the not unthinkable. Because of the investigation led by 3 University of South Florida researchers, and because of exemplary journalism by the Tampa Bay Times, we now have an intensely discomforting but welcome enrichment of American literature. It requires artistry to write beautifully about children suffering at the hands of evil men, and from the riveting first sentence of his slender new novel The Nickel Boys, even in death the boys were trouble. Colson Whitehead's prose unfurls with controlled fury as he reimagines life at what was the Arthur G. Dozier School for Boys in Marianna, Florida. The fact that Whitehead never raises his authorial voice enhances its wallop. The boys were trouble even as corpses because, in Whitehead's reimagining, the Nickel Academy had been closed after many decades and developers had plans for an office park on part of the land. The plans were, however, impeded by the discovery of bones and belt buckles, all those fractures and cratered skulls, the rib cages riddled with buckshot and other residue of boys who died at the hands of sadists, sexual predators, and others who ran the school for their private fun and profit. 51 bodies had been unearthed by the time Whitehead's novel was published, more are probably yet to be found, and the final count will not provide finality about how many were dumped in what the boys called Boot Hill. In Whitehead's novel, Elwood, an African-American boy abandoned in Tallahassee by his mother, is being raised by his grandmother, whose father died in jail, arrested for bumptious contact after a white woman accused him of not getting out of her way on a downtown sidewalk. Elwood is bound for college until he is falsely accused of stealing a car and is consigned to Nickel, leaving behind his treasured possession, a record of Martin Luther King at Zion Hill. He is driven to the reform school by a good old boy with a meaty backwoods beard and a hungover wobble to his step. He'd outgrown his shirt and the pressure against the buttons made him look upholstered. The Dozier School opened in 1900, and at times took children as young as 5. On most nights at the Nickel School, the only sounds were tears and insects, but on other nights an industrial fan was turned on to muffle the boys' screams when they were beaten by Black Beauty, a 3-foot leather strap with embedded sheet metal that slapped across the ceiling before it came down on your legs. There was splatter on the walls where the fan had whipped up blood in. It's gusting. The white boys bruised differently than the black boys and called it the ice cream factory because you came out with bruises of every color. Whitehead, a Pulitzer Prize winner for his 2016 novel The Underground Railroad, jumps ahead to life after a Nickel boy leaves at age 18. And in his novel's prologue, he writes of Nickel boys' reunions featuring shared darkness. America, however imperfect Americans do not want to know what goes on in their prisons, where a not insignificant portion of the nation's rapes happen, is much better now. More people, public interest lawyers, journalists are alert and watching. And perhaps more will be because of Whitehead's searing reminder that what happened not long ago, and here, was not unthinkable. Nothing, no cruelty is. Yet still we need reminding. When Primo Levi arrived in Auschwitz parched after a brutal train journey, he reached for an icicle to slake his thirst. When a guard yanked it away from him, Levi asked why. The guard replied, "Here ist kein Warum, here there is no why." The death camps were an extreme form of perhaps the logical culmination of what Whitehead calls a culture of impunity. When some people have unrestricted and unreviewable power over others, when no one can be compelled to answer for his actions when asked, why? Some of those with power will behave like beasts simply because they can. And because absolute power corrupts absolutely. This melancholy fact about the human species was underscored last year in a nonfiction book about a lawless sheriff who best rode Florida's Lake County in the 1950s, Beneath a Ruthless Sun, a true story of violence, race, and justice lost and found by Gilbert King. Do you wonder how the Nazis managed to find people willing to work as concentration camp personnel? It was not that difficult. George Will's email address is georgewill@washpost.com. George Will. Washington Post.
The White House. It was on they called the White House. It was on the grounds of the Florida Industrial School for Boys in Marianna, Florida. Decades later, the survivors are speaking out. They call themselves the White House Boys. A half-century ago, they were taken to Florida's oldest reform school, a beautiful place with manicured lawns and ball fields amid the rolling hills and stately pines of rural North Florida. They thought it looked like a college campus. But the red brick walls hid a shameful secret.
The only time that you were taken to what they call the White House was a building where they beat you. And when I say beat you, I'm not talking about a spanking. I'm talking about beating till your underwear was beaten into your buttocks and had to be surgically removed, which is what happened to me.
When you looked at this place, you never could imagine the horror that the bucolic nature of it hid. It looked like a college campus. Dormitories, well-cut lawns, beautiful gardens, a gymnasium for the high school basketball team, a marching band. I mean, you would never consider what lay beneath this was a nightmare.
Michael O. McCarthy, who was sent to the reform school in 1958 when he was 17 years old, remembers one of his beatings.
If you were me, he said, I'd put the corner of that pillow in your mouth and turn your head to the wall. So you don't scream and don't try to get up off this bed or you'll get more. And then the last thing this man said to me was, boy, you're not going to believe this, but this is going to hurt me more than it does you. And that's when he swung the first blow. It sounded like a shotgun going off. It was in this hollow room of all concrete, but you heard it in there, and it was like a shotgun. It was like taking a two-barrel shotgun and firing off. That was the sound of it. And the first one, I remember, drove me and the bed down, and it came back up, and he was able to time it. He had been beating so many boys for so long that the son of a bitch was able to time when the spring would bring you back up so he could match the swing. And he beat me, and he continued to beat me, and he beat me, and he continued to beat me, and he beat me, and he continued to beat me until long after I lost count of how many that he'd beaten me with. And then finally, it was over, and I'd lost count, I think, around 38 or 40 of these. I don't remember very well. And then he said, all right, get up. And I tried to stand up, and I couldn't stand up. I didn't have any strength in my legs or in my back. I couldn't move. My pants were full of blood, and blood was running down my legs. And I think the reason they didn't want you to scream was because it got to them. I think the sound of you screaming somehow reached inside of them and caused them to recognize what they were doing to you, that they just couldn't beat you like you were an object if you were screaming with the kind of pain that you had.
In 1959, Roger Kaiser, who was abandoned by his mother when he was 4, was sent to the reform school after he ran away from a Jacksonville orphanage.
I knew there was no way that the Florida School for Boys at Marianna, being a state-run institution, could possibly be as bad as the Children's Home Society in Jacksonville, Florida. And boy, was I mistaken. I knew that this large leather strap that had a piece of sheet metal sewn in between two halves of leather was underneath the pillow. I felt it slide out. I heard somebody breathe. I turned over real fast and started to jump up, and I saw this look on this guy's face, and I knew he was going to beat me to death. There was no doubt in my mind whatsoever. I tried to jump off the bed. One of the men grabbed me. The other man slapped me in the face with the leather strap, and again, blood went everywhere, all over the walls, all over the bed. That embedded in my mind what humanity was really like. That I was just a piece of crap. And I'd better get that through my head. And they got it through my head.
A third survivor, Robert Straley, was taken to the White House in 1963, the day he entered the reform school.
What it did was it turned me black and blue, and then you had pinholes of blood all over you because of the force of the whip it caused the skin to explode at some point. Now that was just 35 lashes. If you ran, you got 100. And 100 lashes is beyond my imagination to this day. And when they're hitting you on the same spot and they've, already broken the skin or bruised you, you're in some serious pain. And I went out of there in shock. I know, it was just, looking back on it, it's just like a nightmare. You just can't imagine that people would do that. There's, personally, to me, nothing been done worse. They destroyed my childhood. I've been able to cauterize the wound of what they've done to me, but it's done something to me that I can never get over. I can't get over this. This is beyond, it's as if they raped me.
I look at my grandchildren, and I was about their age when all this was happening to me, when it all started. And I think, how could anybody do that to me? How could anybody do that to any child? How could they do it,
And, when you inflict that much pain and brutality on a child, they're traumatized for life, period. It's irreversible, and basically what you're creating is a mini monster.
I said, one day, I looked right at this man, whoever he was. I said, one day, I'm going to get out of here, and I'm going to tell people about what you're doing here. And he pointed his finger at me, and he says, buddy, that's a good way to wake up dead tomorrow morning, mister.
What can I say? It was just a very bad place to be.
Layer by layer, compact red clay begins to expose mixed soil and a burial shaft up on Boot Hill. USF research teams have been working for 3 months to recover the remains of boys buried at the cemetery at the now closed Dozier School for Boys. Using mechanical excavation and detailed archaeological methods, they have uncovered 55 burials, 24 more than previously documented.
What you see behind me in this excavated area is that we have small groups of people working in different burials and excavating them. We use heavy equipment to strip the top layer of soil, and it's really about the top 25 to 30 centimeters to get it started. And what becomes very apparent is the outline in the soil of where the burial is located.
The fieldwork is the culmination of 2 years of extensive research conducted by the USF anthropology team, including graduate students and numerous law enforcement volunteers.
And we spent about a year doing GPR throughout the area, throughout other parts of the school as well, and archival research and talking to former employees and men that were sent here as children and their families, as well as the families of children that were purportedly buried here.
Records indicated 31 boys were buried on Boot Hill. Research methods utilized by the team have discovered far more. To reach the burials, the excavator moves the ground in stages, guided by the map created by measurements and GPR analysis.
A lot of times we take off the overburden in a big chunk, and then we slow down and we do things in 4-inch blocks, and then we're down to a 2-inch block, and then we're down to just cleaning off and just like a very nice 1-inch little scrape over the surface. And that allows all of our features to come straight up. They're plain as day.
And then the rest is done by hand excavation, so trowels, all the way down to dental picks. When you get near remains, it's a very delicate and tedious process at that point, but it allows you to get the most information, to preserve everything and understand the context.
USF graduate student Meredith Tice describes the meticulous detail that the teams follow and the importance of getting a clear picture of the remains in their resting state.
It's extremely important, especially we'll never see the skeleton in the lab as well as we can see it in the field. So documentation through photography, mapping, descriptions are so important, especially when it comes to age estimation.
The recovered remains were brought back to the anthropology labs at USF for further testing and analysis.
We have a series of methods looking at teeth and skeletal remains to try to assess how old was this individual, their age. In this particular case, that's very important because we have children, but ranging in age from 6 to 18. By knowing the general, are they 6, are they 12, are they 18, we can start to do what we call presumptive identification and narrow down that pool of who we're looking for.
The team is continuing to search for additional DNA reference samples to ultimately match the boys with their families.
Hey Charlotte County, this is Charlotte County COPWATCH. I am using any video here with under fair use if you have criticism, reporting, teaching, etc. And please donate. I do not make money from YouTube, and there are different ways to donate in the video links. Thanks.